Hello, it's Crystal Ahamefula. Today, I will be asking whether the time has come for us to insist that Pastor Jerry Ezes' prayers be recognized as an alternative form of treatment, or a complementary form of treatment in the NHS. Some people might argue that this is a controversial statement to make. It's not. NICE, which is the body that regulates treatments for approval on the NHS, has various other alternatives to Western medicine approved for treatment. You have alternative treatments like Reiki healing, spiritual healing, yoga, homeopathy, acupuncture, and various nutritional therapies. You can also hit a brick wall because you will be thrown the argument that you already have Christians who go into hospitals to pray with ill people. We can argue that that form of Christian prayer is not what we're talking about. We're talking about our form of prayer, our fire prayer, from which we carry our evidence. Week in, week out, we see mind-blowing testimonies of the power that is unleashed by God using Pastor Jerry and his prayer warriors. So we can argue that our form of alternative treatment or complementary treatment that we're asking for is different from a subtle kind of Christian prayer, which is universally known, which is we pray, and then if God decides, when he decides, he can answer. We serve our God that is manifested, which is God, which is manifested in the fire altar, is a God who is in very, very, very quick hurry to manifest his power. So we can argue that we have evidence. Yes, it will be very difficult. Don't forget that this is a nation with Richard Dawkins, the evolutionist, who argues that God is a delusion. So it will be very difficult to prove that our prayers work. But hey, I don't suppose that it was also easy for those other alternative practitioners to convince NICE that all those various therapies work. I do not think that we have to have 100% success rate for it to be approved. What I think we should be asking for is a trial. We can suggest, for instance, you've had a mental health problem, your loved one or your child has had a mental health problem. It could be schizophrenia, could be insomnia, could be learning difficulty, and you've had reprieve. You've been cured. So you can use yourself. If a doctor that's known you for ages suddenly sees that they do not see you as often, despite COVID and all that, they do not see you as often as they used to, and that you have had no crisis since you started on NSPPD, fire altar prayers. Yes, they would dismiss your argument as balderdash, but they will not if you try to convince them, to persuade whoever to run this trial. How can this trial be run, and what duration of time might we need for it? The duration of time we can say is 3 months. How might it be run? For instance, if you're a Christian, if you're on the NSPPD, a fire altar, and you're a manager at a mental care home, you can suggest to your bosses, okay, who would then suggest to NICE? You could suggest to them that, listen, we have a roll call in the morning at 9 when we give our patients their medication. you can suggest that the morning prayers begins at 7 and that it lasts for 1.5 hours. So during this time, your wards don't have to get out of bed, but they have to agree, of course, to the prayers and let the prayer blast. But you can't do it, you can't do it on the NHS. You cannot, you're prohibited from imposing your fate on your patients. This is what got a certain nurse, I believe she was from Ghana originally, sacked in 2018 because she prayed for her patients. You're prohibited from doing that on the NHS, and this is where we've had difficulties, because you've had people who've said, well, this is happening, I know that it's happening, but I'm unable to prove it. You don't have to prove anything. You only have to use the other alternatives that have been approved and say, because obviously you don't want to lose your job, you don't want to be sacked. No, nobody wants that. So if you can convince for a trial to be held based on the evidence, and these are your patients, and of course you want them to be cured. But the thing is that we have to be the ones, Black people have to be the one that initiates this, because we are mostly churchgoers. Here in the West, people don't go to church. Our age mates, our demographic, they do not go to church. And sometimes when you talk about church, they think you're talking out of the back of your ears. So you know that you're going to have an uphill struggle to get anyone to believe that there's some and then you say that it's a Nigerian pastor. No one's going to listen to you, because we're already not seen as honest people, right? Nigerians are not. So you can say, look, you don't have to believe the evidences that I know are there. Let's do a trial. Because almost every week in, week out, we have fantastic testimonies of people with mental health. It could be people with sleep problems or learning difficulty. And last week, for example, we heard the testimony of the woman from America who testified that the nephew, who has for 29 years been feeding on rubbish bins, has now been healed. And during the prayers as well, Pastor Jerry did, he did mention the case of, said there was a mother with 2 children who were mentally challenged. Who's to say that if this trial is happening, Pastor Jerry would not be led in the Spirit to give a word of knowledge? And what happens is, if all the people who are taking place gets healed, can you imagine that? The newspapers, can you imagine? And the thing is that this is the time that people are actually most receptive to alternative. I use that word. Yes, it's Christian healing, it's Christ healing, but we don't want the door shut in our face before we've even started, okay? We already know that during this period of COVID, a lot of people, the anti-vaxxers, for instance, no longer, they've lost faith in Western medicine. And recently I read in the newspaper, it was one of my favorite journalists, Yasmin Alibai Brown, writing in The Independent about a top American psychotherapist, Dr. Lisa Miller, who has conducted some investigation, this is for lasting various years, where she's now found evidence to suggest that people with faith are more likely, they're more likely to overcome life's serious challenges because of their faith. And actually, you could see the evidences in their brain. So the part of the brain that's able to withstand all this in people with faith tends to be stronger than people without faith. So we've got an opening to suggest that our prayers be considered as an alternative, because of course it cannot be accepted like that. Our testimonies will not be accepted. It's got to go through, we've got to have empirical evidence, right? And that's what we give them. Why are we qualified? Why are we as Christians, and especially Black Christians, qualified to make this strong suggestion for the mental health? It would lead to a mental health treatment of a whole if this experiment works. Why? We have historically seen mental health issues as a spiritual problem. So we don't necessarily believe that it should be treated with medication, because a spiritual problem needs to be treated by a spiritual remedy, which is what strong prayers that Pastor Jerry offers. This is what it is. That's one. So what outcomes have we had under the Mental Health Act in the NHS? The outcomes that we've had has not been favorable to Black people. One, Black women, for example, are more susceptible to anxiety disorders. Black women are more likely to have depression than their other counterparts. Black men are more likely to suffer psychosis. Black men are more likely to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act. And we don't like taking medication because of, the cultural barrier. So this would make for an interesting research if we push it, because we have seen that it works. If people are on medication, for example, there's a way to get around this. So, in all the trials, they have placebo trials, and then they have people who are just strictly on medication, and then they would have people who consent to just having Pastor Jerry Ezes prayers. So if we do this, I have no doubt in my mind that we will get a favorable outcome, that God will come down and answer the prayers. Can you imagine how the health system will be overhauled, especially for our young men there's a research I read some time ago which said that Black young men are more likely to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act, yeah? But when that research was actually done, they found that 11 years earlier, those people who have now been sectioned were on the same par as their white counterparts. They had no problems. So you've got to know that a system that, continuously jail a certain section of a society because they assume that you're aggressive, okay, it's flawed. So already before you start assessing the medication, there's a stigma, there's a prejudice, there's discrimination that is against you. This can just be a win-win situation. Let's not talk about the disproportionate number of our men in incarceration, right? So can you imagine the reprieve, the relief that we would give our young men if prayer is considered first before they even offered any treatment? So if we're able to successfully argue that, and when this becomes acceptable, it would not just be only Black men. It would filter, it would stream through all the strata of the mental health treatment. So it's a win-win situation. We should drive this. We should start talking, because NICE does not require Parliament's approval before they approve any form of treatment. And you know what? You know what they consider? They consider money, the funding, how much it's going to cost. Prayer is free. Pastor Jerry Ezes' prayer is free. So they don't have to spend any money. All we need is for people to accept that they're going to listen to the prayers. That's all. And it's not going to cost much. So that consideration which is given it, in the sense that how much is the trial going to cost? How much is the drug or whatever going to cost? and how significantly can it improve the quality of life of the receiver. It's not applicable here. Pastor Jerry's prayer is free. So we can argue this. So I implore you to start asking those questions. You're not going to get the sack if you suggest that, can we do it? If you suggest to your consultant or your family, your loved one's consultant, just if we can start with mental health, for us to consider it, for it to be considered an alternative treatment, because you can see that it has worked. And on the fire altar, we have evidence. Say that you are not suggesting that the evidence be considered then, but that a trial be done. Okay, that's it for now. Please tell me what you think about my suggestion. And please subscribe to my channel and also like my video. Until next time, thank you so much and God bless you for watching. Goodbye.